All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, and we do have a group joining us for the first time ever today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. We have done over 165 programs with various scientists, explorers, and conservation groups around the world since schools went out in about mid-March. And so we so appreciate you guys continuing to join us as we highlight these amazing people and places from across the globe. Right now, we are joined live from teachers in Ontario, an entire classroom in California, so a huge hello to them, and of course, tons of you on YouTube. A quick housekeeping note before we dive in. Please let me know where you're joining from on YouTube. I love to know where our groups are coming in from, and you can share questions there. Try and keep the chat bar for questions if you can. You can also join us on the Slido app. So I'll link this in the chat bar, but if you go to Slido, event code DIVE, you can type in questions, share your favorite, and take part in some interactive polls. With that said, the reason we are all here today is we are joined live in Carleton Place, Ontario, just outside of Ottawa, our capital, by Jill Heinerth. So she is an explorer in residence to the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. She is the world's foremost cave diver. She has done adventures all over the globe to every continent and shared a huge variety of stories on our platform over the last 2 years. Today, we are going to be joining her in learning about the crystal caves of the Bahamas, one of the most unique and amazing ecosystems in the entire world. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Jill, and take us away.
Hey everybody, it's great to join you. I feel a little less lonely here in isolation by reaching out to all of you. Today I'm going to share with you some explorations in what I think is one of the most beautiful places on the planet, a place that you've probably never even imagined existed before. And the easiest way for me to do this is actually to share my screen so that you can see some great visuals while I speak. Is here's what we're talking about. We're talking about the blue holes of the Bahamas, these really stunning caves. Quick background on me. I'm the explorer in residence for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, and I'm a full-time underwater explorer. That means that I do an awful lot of image making underwater with big cameras. I shoot television programs. You might find me under the ice. You might even find me camping on top of the ice in the polar regions. This is up in the Arctic when I was shooting a film called Under Thin Ice. So I dive all over the world and do a lot of traveling for my work. This is actually inside an iceberg in Antarctica. I use a lot of specialized life support equipment for what I do, stuff that more closely resembles what an astronaut might use for a spacewalk from the International Space Station. And
whoa, what's this?
You might find me in a place like this. This is in the middle of the Sahara Desert looking for a dive site, or maybe even under the Ural Mountains in Siberia. Perhaps even inside a volcano in the Canary Islands. So I dive in some pretty cool places. I still do a bit of teaching of special people like this. This is James Cameron of Avatar fame. And yet I'll still work, in the middle of the bush in a place like Cuba. So what I do is take imaging equipment and survey gear into underwater caves, these really stunning environments that I think are some of the most beautiful spaces on Earth. Now, the caves I'm going to take you to today are in the Bahamas. So I'm going to specialize on Abaco Island in the Bahamas. And you might have heard about Abaco when the hurricane kind of raked over Marsh Harbor last year, doing a lot of damage on the surface. Fortunately, the crystal caves of Abaco got through the hurricane okay. Now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about many thousands, tens of thousands of feet of underwater cave passages, places that I can swim through beneath your feet, places with openings that look like this. This is, since we're all meeting our pets and everything on Zoom calls these days, this is Otis the blue hole dog who loves to swim in these places where we go cave diving. And these are really interesting entrances that, don't look like much on the top side, but in a minute, you'll see what they look like underwater. So one of the caves that we're looking at here is called Sawmill Sink. And when we're looking at a satellite image of it, it just looks like a black dot in the middle of a forest. But there's 4,500 feet of explored passages there, and some of the most significant fossils that we've ever found in the Bahamas. So I go there with my colleagues and often with exploration projects from National Geographic to document these amazing places. Through our work, and specifically the work of my colleague Brian Kakuk, who lives in Abaco, we've created a blue hole conservation area. It's crown land, so it's a forest that used to be logged, but now, there are 19 offshore blue holes and several inland blue holes covering tens of miles of passages, all of which are still being explored. And this is what they look like beneath the surface. So quite beautiful. These caves were formed during times on our Earth when the ocean levels were lower sea levels, and these caves were dry. So water soaked down through the ground, dripped from the ceiling and landed on the floor, kind of like the way candle wax would pile up. And we can now swim through these formations because the ocean levels are higher and these caves are flooded. To get there, we travel sometimes in small aircraft with a lot of equipment. We go from the US, from Miami, and head out to these locations. And then we hack our way through the bush in some cases to get to these locations. Some of the spaces inside these caves are really small, and we have to squeeze through small spaces with our gear. And some are quite a bit bigger. But as you'll see, they're really beautiful. At times, the visibility underwater can be horrible because our bubbles will strike the ceiling and things will rain down on top of us, and then our fins can also kick up the silt. So you'll see in this picture, there's actually a bit of an orange guideline. So we lay guideline in the cave in order to have a safe way to come out by feel if we can't see. I work with many different scientists in the blue holes because I become their eyes and hands in places that they can't necessarily reach. Places like this beautiful spot. Some of the people I work with are geologists who are interested in the formations, the speleothems they're called, that are kind of like icicles in a way. In fact, we call this spot here the frozen rain. And like I said, the formations in caves happen when things drip from the ceiling and land on the floor and pile up over time, creating massive piles of rock. These particular speleothems are called helictites, and when the cave was dry, it was also windy underground inside the cave, and the wind blew these formations as they were being formed and created these really intricate, beautiful things. We also find things like this, crystals on the floor that are formed in pools that were on the floor and now are completely submerged. You'll see some red material in this little gore pool, and we see red material in larger spaces as well. And we're really interested in this red deposit inside the cave because this is actually dust from the Sahara Desert. So when it's really dry on planet Earth, dust from the Sahara Desert can rise up into the atmosphere, blow across the Atlantic Ocean, and land on the surface. Then it gets carried down through the soils and rock to drip from the ceiling to the floor and deposit itself inside these caves. So we still have Sahara dust storms on the planet these days. So once in a while, like here's a Sahara dust storm. This is a satellite image of a Sahara dust storm coming off the continent and blowing over the Canary Islands. Here's another shot where you can see this red dust in the air. But when we see it underwater in a cave, it looks like this. So it's a really, really fine sediment that we can easily disturb and sort of waft into the water column so that we can look at it. And this stuff gets trapped inside the rocks inside the cave over time. So really interesting stuff. Again, here's a satellite sort of map to show you the dust coming off of Africa, blowing across the ocean, and the Bahamas are really directly in its course when it comes across towards North America. So if we slice these formations open, we can actually see these red layers inside the rock. And that's what helps us learn how old this cave is. So we've actually brought some formations out, sliced them open, and been able to count back in time, kind of like counting tree rings. And that's told us that these caves are about 350,000 years old. Now, I also work with biologists looking at the life inside these caves because they're interested in these unique animals that live their entire life cycle inside the blackness of an underwater cave. So these fish and crustaceans usually have either no eyes or just eye spots or undeveloped eyes that don't work anymore. And a lot of them have no pigment as well. So really interesting animals. They don't have eyes because they can't see, and they don't have pigment because there's no one looking at them underwater in the darkness of a cave. But what they do have is some pretty unique ways to sense their environment so that they can hunt and feed. Like this remipede, he actually has venomous fangs and pincers and can attack something almost 30 times his size to kill it and eat it over time. So these remarkable animals, like us, swim through these beautiful underwater caves. Now, I also work with archaeologists and paleontologists who are interested in the cultural remains that we find inside caves that even include things like these human skulls. So at times, these caves were used like portals to the underworld for some civilizations who left behind burials as well as sacrifices in some of these spaces. Today, rather than taking these objects out of the cave, we actually scan things in place inside these caves and just bring the data out to scientists so that we can leave these objects undisturbed where they're pretty well conserved in the environment. We also scan entire environments in these underwater caves so that we can show archaeologists where the objects are, but also where the objects are in relationships to other objects, like skulls beside wood, beside rocks, beside other artifacts. And today we can actually show these 3D scans to people like in virtual reality, but also in augmented reality. And if you've ever played Pokemon Go, that's kind of what augmented reality is. It's a way that you can look through a special pair of glasses and see 3D assets that we've scanned, but you can still see the environment around you. So this is an Ice Age bear skull that we've scanned inside a cave, and the bear skull is a hologram, but the guy's arms behind that, that's an actual archaeologist, and the space around him, that's right in the cave, or outside the cave, where we scanned this bear skull. So in order to see it, we wear something like the Microsoft Hololens, and then we are able to actually see in 3 dimensions.
Super cool. Just so you know, Jill, the audio doesn't get picked up from the video. We just see what's going on.
Okay, you can't hear the audio. Okay, all right. I'm just going to stop that. So what you're looking at then is the bear, again, the bear scan in front of the cave where we actually scanned it. This is the HoloLens on one of our Mayan guides who is able to see those assets right in the location where we scan them and therefore experience what are probably the remains of his ancestors. So pretty powerful stuff. The other thing that we do in caves that's kind of cool, and something that I've done with some local visiting kids, is that we can put beacons inside the cave and project a radio frequency through the rock to the top side so that the kids can walk over the surface of the earth and follow us, even though we're beneath their feet swimming through the cave system itself. So that's a pretty cool thing. So in one of the previous Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants sessions I did by satellite from the Bahamas, we actually got kids involved in cave exploration activities. So we taught them about how we do some of our cave training techniques. We showed them the animals that we brought out from the cave and then let them help us return them back to the water when we were done. We even taught the kids about bush medicine, so some of the plants that grow around the blue holes and the things that they could make with these plants, things that they could eat and things that they could use as medicine. We also shared with them some of the paleontological remains that we've recovered from these caves, like this crocodile skull and a large land tortoise skull that we brought out of Sawmill Sink. These are really important fossils that are being studied today in the Bahamas. So the kids got a chance to see the geology, the paleontology, the biology, and even practice some of the cave diving safety techniques. And so it's a really great opportunity for them, maybe not to get wet, but at least to see some of the cool things that we get to interact with in these caves. So it's a pretty remarkable environment, and I feel pretty privileged to be a cave explorer and to work in these places that nobody's ever been before. So I'm going to turn off my screen share and give you guys a chance to ask me some questions about what I do and about the crystal caves or anything else to do with diving as a career or a hobby.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jill, for such an awesome presentation. And again, such amazing imagery. The feedback on YouTube has been tremendous. So for all our groups, there's a few ways in which you can take part and share questions. You can share them directly on YouTube. Please do just let me know where you're joining from. You can share them on our Slido app, event code DIVE. And of course, we're going to take questions from all our live groups. So what I'm going to do to start is take a question from YouTube to kick us off. And this has been a question from a number of people, Jill, and I know it's one you love to answer. Have you ever been scared when you're underwater?
I'm always scared. And I love that. That's my favorite question. And I get asked it almost every time I give a presentation. It's important to be scared because you're doing something that's risky. So I want to dive with people that are also scared because it means that we both care about the outcome. We both care about being safe. And when you step into the darkness, whether it's cave diving like me, or whether you're doing something you've never done before, or faced something that you've never imagined, like being isolated at home right now, it's okay to be scared. Fear is important for keeping us safe. But when you stand on the edge of that threshold of the darkness, that's where you have an opportunity to be an explorer too, and do something for you, or maybe new for humanity.
How cool is that? Thanks, Jill. All right, let me go to Miss Mally's group. And Miss Mally, do you want to share a question with us? You can go for it.
Sure. I have a question from my student Aon, and he was just wondering what made you go cave diving originally?
Well, you know, when I was a little kid, I used to like crawling around in caves, not filled with water, and that was really fun for me. So when I became a diver, I actually didn't even know that cave diving was something that existed. But somebody took me into a cavern, so like the doorway, the entrance to a cave, and I just went, wow. So like immediately, I just fell in love with the environment. And I kind of wanted to be an explorer from the time I was a little kid. And this is what gave me the chance to do something that nobody's done before and go to places where nobody's ever seen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jill. All right, Miss Reynolds, I know you're joining us today from Toronto. So if you want to have a question, let me just demute your mic and share it with us. Go for it.
I'm sorry, we don't have any questions at this time.
That's okay. Well, I'll come back later and check. And if you have one, then you can let me know in the chat bar. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. You're welcome. All right. Well, we're going to go to Miss Schultz's group then. So we've got a bunch of kids that have sort of raised their hands on Zoom. So I'm going to go to Casey. Casey, if you have a question for us, you are demuted. Go for it.
Have any of you been attacked by anything?
In caves, I once met up with a bull shark face to face. Like we came around the corner and kind of went, wah! We scared each other, but it didn't get attacked. I've been bitten by an eel in a cave. and it was by accident. He didn't mean it. And I got bitten by a sea lion once. It didn't injure me, but it did puncture my suit and flood my suit. But other than that, no big attack stories.
Considering how many times you dove, that's pretty good, all things considered. So there you
I
go.
did do a Hollywood movie called The Cave, so you can find that on Netflix, and that's about monsters in caves and cave diving.
Correct. All right. I love this question from Devasena on YouTube, and she wants to know, how do you prepare for cave dives?
So sometimes it takes me years to prepare for an expedition or a particular cave dive, training and learning new things and getting myself current and up to date with the technology. It's really like doing a space mission in a way. But right before the dive, the preparation, once I'm all geared up and I've done all my safety checks, which are really important, I kind of close my eyes and pre-visualize everything that could possibly go wrong. And then I think about how I'm going to deal with each of those problems. And so it's like solutions thinking. So I think, oh, okay, if this hose blows up, I might have to reach back. Can I reach that valve? Oh, yeah, I can reach that. Good. And after I turn that off, I'll have to turn this thing on. And so I pre-visualize the solutions. So that way I get rid of that scared feeling and I can go underwater knowing that I can solve anything.
Awesome. We always get that question, but it's always a nice one to get in.
Mhm.
All right, I'm going to go to Mo now in Miss Schultz's class. So if you have a question, you are now demuted. Go for it, man.
I actually had two. I was gonna ask, like, how many species have you found in the caves, and how many caves have you visited?
Yeah, great
Oh,
question.
good questions. So I've done over 8,000 dives. I'm not even sure how many of those are cave dives, but probably at least half of them are cave dives. I've been a part of a team that has discovered a lot of species that have never been known before to scientists. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of species in caves that we have yet to identify. So that life is everywhere, living in between the grains of sand in the soil and underwater in caves. And there's still a lot of work to do. Great questions. Thank you.
I wish that there had been a screen share where we could see Mohao's face when you said 8,000, because that was awesome, man. All right, let's take our most popular question on Slido right now, which is, so 8,000 dives is a lot. How long have you been doing this to even accumulate that many dives?
So I've been diving more than 30 years now, and really actively. So for many years when I lived in the tropics, I'd be doing like 3 or 4 dives a day. So lots and lots of diving. Now dives might be half an hour, 2 hours, but my longest mission is 22 hours. So some of them have been pretty long.
Fantastic. All right, let's go to another group in Ms. Schultz's class. So Leah, if you have a question, you are unmuted. Actually, it's not letting me unmute you. So Leah Herrera, there you go, you're good to go. Ask away.
Okay. I forgot what I was going to say.
That's okay. I like the mood lighting in the room though. Very cool.
Yeah, mood lighting is quite cool.
Yeah, let's go to Devlin then. Devlin has a question. Go for
Wait, I forgot.
it. No, we forget our questions too half the time. All right, well, let me go back to Slido then for a second. Do you ever find rare things? And this could be
yes.
things, yeah, whatever you want to cover that.
So when we discover a new species, so an animal that someone's never ever seen or written about before, it might be like the very first time and only time we ever find an animal. And when an animal lives in one cave and nowhere else on Earth, we say that it's endemic to one cave. But in some cases, we have found animals that are endemic to a single room in a single cave on the planet, and we found them nowhere else. So that's really, really rare.
Awesome. You had said something a minute ago about your longest mission, this 22-hour mission in a cave, and Miss Huxley from Brampton wants to know, what were you doing on that expedition?
So yeah, that 22-hour mission was a project called the Wakulla 2 project with the United States Deep Caving Team. And we were creating the first ever accurate 3-dimensional map of any cave, dry or wet. And it's a really deep cave, almost 300 feet deep. And so in order to do dives that deep, we have to do a couple things. First, we have to change the mixture that we're breathing in order to stay safe. So we're actually breathing oxygen, nitrogen, and helium primarily. But then we also have to do a very slow, staged return back to the surface. And that's why the mission takes 22 hours.
Awesome. All right. Let's go back to Devlin. If you have a question, you should be demuted. Wants to work. There we go. Try it again.
Do you ever, like, anytime you're swimming, do you ever get tired? Like, do you ever get the feeling that you want to come back up?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, some expeditions are exhausting. We have a rule in cave diving, and the rule is that anyone can call the dive at any time for any reason. So if me or one of my teammates is tired, we just give a thumbs up signal, and then everyone in the team gives the thumbs up signal, and we turn around and we come out.
Yeah,
Good one.
Nice when we can highlight sort of the technical aspects of diving. And actually, I want to play off this, the safety of diving and you getting into it, when you were younger. For kids at home, when can you start learning how to dive, Jill?
When you're 8, you can start learning how to dive. You can get a fully qualified as an junior open water diver at 10, and then continue to dive with your parents or a professional. When you're 15, I think then you're able to dive on your own. So I think everyone that I'm seeing on the screen can start. Start your education online.
Yes. So wherever you are, I mean, this is something we have today, a California class, some Ontario teachers, but wherever you are, Canada, the US, internationally, there are dive programs available to you. And as Jill said, you can start online, start the process. It's a really, really fun and amazing thing to be able to explore 70% of the world that you otherwise wouldn't be able to.
There's actually an organization called RAID. So DiveRaid.com, and they have opened their entire e-learning scuba library for free forever, not just for this quarantine time, but forever. So you can take your e-learning portion of your diving class online and do your tests and quizzes, and then find an instructor to do the water part. And then if you love diving, you can go through like a lifetime worth of classes and get all the e-learning part of it for free from RAID. So that's DiveRaid.com if you want to start learning at home.
Amazing. I'm going to put that in the YouTube chat bar in just a second. We're going to go to a few more students from Ms. Schultz's class. I also want to remind Ms. Reynolds, if you have a question, just let me know in the chat bar and I'll come back to you and we can take one from your class as well. But let's go to the student known as It's My Dog's Birthday. If you have a question, let's unmute your mic and you're good to go.
Cool.
What platform is the film on, or what, like, is it like on Netflix?
Yeah, how do we find this film?
Oh, The Cave? Or yeah, The Cave, I think you can get it on Netflix still. But if you want to look at a lot of other content, you can go to my YouTube channel. So that's YouTube/ and then my name. I guess Jesse can put that into the chat bar. And you can look at lots of short content there too. Or my website, intotheplanet.com, has links to all kinds of videos about diving.
Fantastic. I will link that in the chat bar in a minute. So thank you so much for that, Jill. All right, let's go to Ms. Reynolds. If you have a question, come on up. You have to demute your own mic. It's not letting me do that. So when you're all set, we will take your query. Let's see.
Yes,
Perfect.
I have several questions. Adam would like to know, how many different pieces of diving equipment do you use to go diving? And okay.
Yeah, so boy, we have a lot of equipment. So when I get in the water, I've carried anywhere from, 80 to 600 pounds of equipment on me underwater. So sometimes I'm using a scooter to pull me through the water, or driving a mapping device. I'm wearing rebreathers, carrying extra tanks. So a lot of stuff, but it depends on the dive. So some are simpler than others. You can go diving with as little as, 40 or 50 pounds of equipment with a single tank on your back.
Cool. All right, Ms. Reynolds,
Thank
ask
you.
another one.
And Natalie would like to know, what is the most interesting thing you have found cave diving?
These are the hardest questions for me, actually, like what's your favorite cave or what's the most interesting thing that you've seen? Because there's so much that's fascinating to me. But I think some of the cultural remains that I've found inside of caves are pretty amazing. Like there was one time in a cave in Mexico where we found two skeletons, full skeletons of an adult male and a child. And they were laid out like in a funeral kind of positioning and surrounded with pottery. And inside the pottery, there were the bones of birds and dogs. And those were meant to be like the guides to the underworld, basically. And these were Mayan remains, so very old remains. But that was like, whoa, what have we just found? Pretty interesting.
Okay. We get that question every time, and I'm sure it's basically impossible to answer it fully, but like there's so many fantastic things. And again, I said this at the beginning to our live groups, and I'll say it to our YouTube groups as well. Jill's done a number of presentations with us, and so if you're really keen on this, if you thought there was fantastic imagery today, check out our other ones on our YouTube channel, but there's so many neat expeditions she has been on and shared with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Jill, we got a question from a bunch of kids on YouTube. Have you ever found fossils of extinct animals?
Yes, quite often, actually. So in caves in Mexico, we found Ice Age bears. We found the remains of camels in Mexico. We found extinct sloth remains. So they're sort of bear-like animals. So quite a lot. And it seems like, the deeper we go into some of these places, it almost feels like we're going back in time and finding these very, very old fossils. But we also think of some of the living animals in the caves, like that remipede with the fangs and the pincers. Those are kind of living fossils because they haven't evolved since before the extinction of the dinosaurs. And so we can find fossils of those animals in stone, and we find the same looking animals swimming in the caves today. So that would be like the same as if I looked out my window and saw a dinosaur walking down the street. That's pretty amazing to me.
That is pretty amazing by any standard. All right, we're going to take a few more questions, guys. So what I'm going to do first is go to Shrudika on our group from Ms. Schultz's class. If you have a question, just unmute your microphone and you're good to go.
What do you do with animals you find?
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, great question. With animals that we find that have never been described before by scientists, we have to capture 3 of them. And so that they can be used in different ways to describe the species and draw the species, and also to do some DNA sampling. So we take 3 samples of a new animal and no more than that, because they could be very, very rare. And unfortunately, those animals sort of sacrifice themselves for the sake of science. But at other times, we have brought animals out of the cave to study them, and then we take them home. So we swim all the way back into the cave where we found them. We let them out of the little jar, and they go free.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to take 2 more questions. So I'm going to go to Ms. Reynolds first for a question from Julian. So Ms. Reynolds, if you want to demute your mic again and pass along that question in person, go for it. And then we'll go to Leah, who remembers her question from earlier. So Ms. Reynolds, you should be good to go.
Okay, great. Julian would like to know, how do you haul all of that lighting equipment? And then Grayson would like to know, how do you stay warm in places like Antarctica? What equipment do you use?
Great. So all of the gear that we take in the cave, like I was saying, I've swam with 500 or 600 pounds of equipment, but we balance it in a way that it is neutrally buoyant, meaning it won't float and it won't sink. It'll just kind of hover in the water. And that makes it easier to swim through the water column. So that's neutral buoyancy. And then to stay warm, I depending on how cold the water is, I'll wear a wetsuit or a dry suit for the polar regions. So a dry suit seals around my neck and my wrists, and then has special gloves that snap on and a hood that snaps on. About that much of my face is still wet, but it means it's tolerable. But the water can be as cold as 28 Fahrenheit or minus 1.8 Celsius. And it's pretty chilly.
pretty chilly. If anyone's ever been in even like 10, 14 degree water, that's pretty chilly. So when you're getting that low, and that's Celsius, sorry.
Yeah.
All right, let's do our last question from Leah. You've been waiting a while, and I know you remembered your question, so let me demute your mic. And oh, you might have to demute your own mic, Leah. It's not letting me. There you go. You're perfect. Good to go.
I actually have 2 questions.
Do it.
Okay.
Okay, what's the most common creatures you found, and what's the deepest cave you've been in?
Awesome.
Okay, my deepest dive is 460 feet. My deepest cave dive, almost 400 feet deep, my deepest cave dive. And the most common thing that I've seen, nothing's very common inside of caves, but maybe catfish and blind crayfish. I see a lot of those in Florida. The blind crayfish are cool because crayfish that live outside the cave live in the river for about 2 or 3 years. Crayfish inside the cave that have no eyes, no color, live for 200 years. So they're pretty neat.
No, sorry, I'm going to harp on this. We know that they live 200 years. An individual crayfish lives that long.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic, guys. Well, we are at the end of our program, people. So, Jill, this has been fantastic as always. For everyone tuning in at home, do check out the website. I've linked it in the chat bar. I know we have more questions than we can possibly take in a session, but what we do for Ms. Schultz's class, Ms. Reynolds, and more, is I'm going to demute everyone's microphones. And so, boys and girls, if you guys could join me in saying a huge thank you to Jill for joining us today. You are all now demuted. So join me. Go for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That's awesome.
So appreciate you joining in today, everyone. I can't demute you all, so I'll just talk over. Do check out Jill's other programs on our Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants site. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, check us out on social media and more, and do check out Jill's amazing website to learn more about the cool work that she does. Jill, thank you so much for joining us once again. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'll do that.
All right, have a nice day, everyone. Bye.